Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be making a super simple shoulder bag fanny pack. And this is actually a remake of a previous video. I revised the pattern, making a few minor adjustments and also added more detail into the video. Like I said, this is a super simple fanny pack, so if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, if you are new to the channel, grab that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need a half yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These are all super easy fabrics to work with and they're very durable. I'm actually going to be using an upholstery fabric. Sometimes these fabrics can be more difficult to work with, so if you're choosing to work with something like this, you may need to make minor adjustments along the way, but I'll get more into that once we get started. But like always, since you're making the bag, you might as well use the fabric that you want to use and see if it works, because you never know until you try it. You'll need a half yard for your secondary fabric, and this is going to be your lining, so I recommend using something lighter weight, because in the end, once you start layering these fabrics together, it can be pretty tricky to sew everything, so just be cautious of this when you're picking out your secondary fabric. You'll need one 16-inch zipper, and it doesn't matter which style you choose because I'm going to show you how to work with any style zipper. I'm actually going to be cutting mine off of a zipper roll. I found this was a great way to go. You can cut your zippers to the precise length with minimal waste. You'll need 2 yards of 1-inch webbing, and this is going to be for the strap. You can use thinner or wider webbing for a different look, but you may need to alter the pattern just a little bit. And we'll get more into that once we start assembling the fanny pack. Going along with that webbing, you'll need 1 buckle and 1 strap slider. Both of these you want to be 1-inch width. If you choose to alter the width of your webbing, you're going to want to match the buckle and the strap slider to that width. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before taping the pattern together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. Once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. And after taping your pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. From here, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. Once you cut out all the panels, you should end up with 4 front side panels, 2 cut out of your secondary fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric. 2 top pocket panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 front main panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. And lastly, 2 back main panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. Moving on to construction, we're going to start by grabbing both of the front main panels. Using the pattern, we're going to locate the zipper edge for both the main fabric and the secondary fabric. From here, we can place the pattern off to the side and grab our 16-inch zipper. If your zipper is not exactly 16 inches, that's totally fine because we're actually going to be snipping the ends. We mainly want this zipper to be longer than the panel, so if your zipper extends past the outside edges, you're good to go. So place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric and the right side of the secondary fabric to the wrong side of the zipper, sandwiching the zipper in between both of the layers and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I do recommend adding a few pins to keep the layers from moving around. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to double check both sides, make sure the top is perfectly lined up, flip the wrong sides of the fabric together. Line up the outside edge of the secondary and main fabric, place a few pins, and from here we're going to add a top stitch along the zipper edge. For a nice neat stitch, I recommend looking into an edge presser foot. With the top stitch complete, check both sides to look for any errors. If everything is looking good, we're going to fold this panel in half with the secondary fabrics together and mark the center on the main fabric. I like to mark both the bottom and top edge, and from here we can flip it open with right sides facing up. And it's always good to double check the center by placing the pattern piece over top, because it's very crucial you get that exact center for the next step. In this next step, we're going to grab the top pocket panels. Using the pattern, we're going to locate the center guide and mark the center on the top and bottom of both the main and secondary fabric. After marking the center, find the zipper edge, and this is going to be the curved edge at the front of the panel. This will be the edge we attach to the opposite side of the zipper. And this is why we marked all those centers, because we're going to line those centers up with right sides together. This will end up being the center of the top pocket, so once you have it, place a pin. And what we're going to do is sew from the center to the outside edge, lining up the main and secondary fabric as we sew with the zipper. And then we're going to do the same thing for the opposite side, starting at the center and sewing towards the outside. Keep in mind we are sewing at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And the reason we're doing it this way is to help keep that pocket as centered as possible. Because when you're sewing curves like this, you're sewing on a bias and it can stretch a little bit, so you have to work with that fabric as you're sewing it and make sure it doesn't move a lot. After finishing up the stitch, double check both sides, flip the right sides out. Just like in previous steps, we're going to line up the outside edge of the top pocket panel, place a few pins to keep it from moving around, and add a top stitch on that zipper edge. This top stitch is super noticeable, so I highly recommend taking your time and making it as neat as possible. After finishing up the top stitch, you probably noticed that I don't have a zipper train on the zipper, and that's actually the next step. I'm going to grab the zipper train and place it on the zipper. And you can add it to either side of the zipper, it just depends on which side you want to open the bag from. So slide the zipper towards the center, and the reason I added it last because it tends to get in the way when you're adding the panels and overall top stitching. So keeping it out of the way as long as possible really makes for a quicker production. Moving on to the next step, grab all of your front side panels. In order to place these panels on the correct side, we're going to use the pattern and locate the top edge. And the longer side of the panel should be pointing towards the outside edge of the assembly. And essentially what we're going to do is place the right side together, lining up the outside edge of the assembly. But real quick before we move on, if your panel doesn't line up perfectly, more than likely it has to do with the width of the zipper. Zippers do come in different widths, and if you sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, it may be a little bit taller or smaller, but it's totally fine. All you have to do is lay your panel on top and just trim it to the size of your actual assembly. Just that little bit of trimming is not going to make a whole lot of difference when it comes to finishing up the bag. But anyways, moving on, sandwich the assembly in between both of the front side panels. And you'll definitely want to place a few pins to keep everything lined up and from moving around. Quickly check both sides, and if everything's looking good, we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both of the side edges. After finishing up the stitch, do one more check on both sides of the assembly. And before we go any further, we can take care of those zipper ends by snipping them flush with the seam allowance. With the zipper ends snipped, we're going to flip the wrong sides of the front side panels together, line up the outside edges like we did in previous steps, place a few pins, and add a top stitch to the inside edge of both front side panels. After finishing up the top stitch, we're going to look over the panel one more time, make sure that bottom edge and top edge line up perfectly with the front side panel. If it's looking good, we can place this panel off to the side and grab our back main panel. The first thing we're going to do is separate the panels and place the wrong sides together. Using the pattern, we're going to locate the webbing placement guides, and this is going to be the side edges of the back main panel. And I'm going to be using just a standard 1-inch webbing. It's strong and it's going to work great for straps. When it comes to cutting the correct sides, I like to just roll it out and cut 2 1-yard strips. Overall, this is going to give me a lot of room to play around with and trim it down if I need to. I highly recommend starting at least 1 yard per side. Once you figure out your sizing, you can customize it from there. But anyways, like we did in the previous step, we located the webbing placement guides, and we're going to place the webbing directly on those webbing placement guides in the center of the side. And I like to hang my webbing off the edge about a 1/2 inch. We will be trimming it up, but it just ensures I get a nice stitch. And from here, we're going to tack stitch the webbing down by stitching as close as we can to the outside edge. We're essentially just keeping it in place so it's easier in future steps when we add the front assembly to the back assembly. It's always good to double check to make sure the straps line up directly in the center of the back panel after stitching. If everything is lined up and looking good, we can grab the front assembly, mark all the centers. Before we place the panels together, I like to move the webbing out of the way, and what I do is just roll it up into a little ball and rubber band it down. This helps keep it out of the way, and from here we can place the front assembly to the back assembly, lining up the top and bottom edges. I typically use 4 pins, 1 in the bottom center, 1 in the top center, and 1 on both of the sides. Because when it comes to sewing the bottom curved edge, I like to do it the same way we did the top pocket panel. I line up the edges as I'm sewing, work with that bias, and make sure it doesn't become uneven as I'm sewing. But anyways, once you have everything lined up, we're going to stitch all the way around that outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you really have to take your time when it comes to this step. You may not get it right your first try. Sometimes your machine might not be set up right and your presser foot is set too tight, causing the layers to become uneven as you're stitching. But all these things can be worked out, giving you the right information to make a perfect bag. What we want to do next is snip the webbing ends flush with the seam allowance. And before we jump into the next step, a good thing to do is open up the bag, check the inside edges, make sure all the layers got stitched together. It's very easy for these layers to become separated, causing a little gap, but all you have to do is go back, stitch over it, and you're good to go. The next step is optional. We're going to be cleaning up those raw edges by adding double fold bias tape. Ultimately, this is going to make for a perfect inside lining and add to the durability. I'm going to run you through a few techniques for adding this double fold bias tape ranging from beginner to advanced. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. In this technique, you make your own double-sided bias tape to the size and fabric you want to use. All you do is cut your strips, feed it through your folder, and press it when it comes out the folder. It's very easy to do, and you get to customize the bias tape to your exact measurements. The second technique is using a double fold bias tape binder. This is the most efficient technique. You cut your strips, feed it through your binder, and sew it directly to your raw edge. And the last technique is using pre-made double fold bias tape. You are limited to colors, but it's very easy to use. You fold it over the edge and stitch it down. And you want to make sure you apply it all the way around the outside edge. I'm going to be using the double fold bias tape attachment. First I add it to the sides, snip it flush, and then I add it to the top and bottom edge. I like to extend my bias tape past the edges about 1 to 2 inches. This allows me to fold those bias tape strips over once or twice and add a tack stitch. And since this is on the inside of the bag, it doesn't have to look absolutely perfect. You just want it to look good enough so it doesn't unravel. With all of our ends folded and tack stitched down, we can finally open up the zipper and flip the right sides out. The first thing I like to do is double check the edges, and a quick tip, you can add top stitches along the webbing ends. This will add another line of strength and overall really secure those straps down so they don't rip out. Keep in mind it is very bulky with all the layers, so use the proper equipment. At this point, we can take the rubber band off the straps, lay the straps out with right sides facing up. Before we add the buckle, you can quickly try this on and trim the straps back to your preferred length. Once you're satisfied, grab the buckle and strap slider. We're going to start by adding the strap slider, and you can add it to either side of the bag. And we're going to slide that strap slider on about 1 foot to 1.5 feet. Just enough to give us some room to work with. And our buckle has a 2-sided opening and a 1-sided opening. If your buckle doesn't look exactly like this, that's totally fine. All you do is need 1-sided opening on each side of the buckle. I'm going to start on the end that has the 2 openings, and I'm going to loop the webbing around that center post. Pull the end out about 1 foot, feed some slack through the strap slider, and we're going to feed that webbing end back through the strap slider, from the outside opening back down through the inside opening. Pull that end out about 4 inches from that strap slider, and what we're going to do is roll it over and tack stitch it down. And remember to tack stitch it down to the opposite side it went through the strap slider. Feel free to add a box stitch, an X stitch, a couple more tack stitches to really secure it down. With the hard side complete, we can move to the other side of the bag and feed the webbing end through the opposite side of the buckle. And with this end, you can pull it out as far as you want. I'm going to pull it out about 4 inches, roll it over once, and add a tack stitch. Again, you can add multiple bar tack stitches, a box stitch, an X stitch. Really, the more you add, the stronger the strap will be. And with the strap complete, we only have one more step, and that's adding our branding. Add it all over the bag and strap where you think looks best. I also like to add little zipper pulls. I think this little detail looks nice, and it makes it so easy to open the bag. And if you're wondering, I'm just using strips of leather that I branded and added with double-sided rivets. But like always, get creative with it and find something that looks cool with your fabrics. And there you have it, your shoulder bag fanny pack is complete. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Hopefully this revised version of the video filled in the gaps. And again, all these techniques used to make this bag, you can use this for all of your sewing projects when it comes to making bags or making garments. Like always, I want to see how your bags turned out, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing. But until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.